Patriotism is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. It triggers something primal, a sense of belonging, identity, and shared purpose that transcends individual self-interest. People throughout history have done extraordinarily brave things in its name. They have also done extraordinarily terrible things in its name. The difference between the two outcomes has almost never been about the feeling itself. It has always been about the quality of thinking that either accompanied that feeling or was replaced by it. And right now, in the most consequential technology sector of the modern era, the defense tech industry, the feeling is running very hot, and the thinking is struggling to keep pace. I want to describe a room for you. Spring of 2025, Washington, D.C., the Hill and Valley Forum, packed with tech founders, venture capitalists, Pentagon officials, and members of Congress. The energy in that room has been described as electric, evangelical, urgent. The language being used by everyone in attendance was consistent. America must lead. Silicon Valley must stop sitting on the sidelines. We are in a technological competition with China that we cannot afford to lose. The time for hesitation is over. Build, deploy, win. Every single one of those propositions may be true. And still, the process by which billions of dollars are being allocated and autonomous weapon systems are being deployed based primarily on that emotional energy, without corresponding investments in governance frameworks, ethical review, legal accountability, or long-term strategic thinking, represents one of the most serious underreported risks of this moment. I'm calling it vibe patriotism, and I want to be specific about what I mean, because I am not making an anti-military argument. I am not suggesting America should disarm. The argument I'm making is much more specific. Emotional nationalism, deployed as a substitute for strategic rigor, has historically been the precondition for military catastrophe rather than the prevention of it. And the defense tech boom of 2025 and 2026 has the emotional intensity of a movement and the oversight architecture of a startup. Palmer Luckey is the most visible figure in this cultural transformation. He was a young prodigy who built virtual reality hardware, sold it to Facebook for $2 billion, and then was pushed out of that company over his political donations. The experience appears to have hardened into something. He founded Anduril with an explicitly ideological pitch that American technologists have a patriotic obligation to build superior weapons, and that anyone in the tech industry who refuses is effectively ceding the battlefield to adversaries who have no such moral hesitation. The pitch has worked. Anduril is now worth $30 billion. It employs thousands of engineers who, a decade ago, might have been building Instagram filters or Spotify recommendation algorithms. Today they are building AI-enabled autonomous weapons systems and lethal drone platforms. Marc Andreessen, the venture capitalist who arguably shapes Silicon Valley's intellectual culture more than any other individual, has been even more explicit. He has articulated a framework in which supporting defense tech is essentially a moral obligation for anyone who believes in liberal democratic values, because those values will only survive if the nations that hold them maintain overwhelming military and technological superiority. He has said publicly that the era of Silicon Valley shunning military work is, in his words, completely over. He is right about the trend. Whether the framework is as airtight as he presents it is a different question. The cultural effect of these voices has been substantial. Publications that in 2018 were covering the Google Maven protests sympathetically are in 2025 running articles with headlines like "The Tech World is Openly Embracing Nationalism." Incorporated magazine published a piece listing the defense tech companies to watch in 2025, describing the industry's embrace of nationalism as a straightforward feature rather than a phenomenon requiring critical examination. The framing has shifted from, "Is this appropriate?" to, "How do you get in on this?" The problem with vibe patriotism is not that it is insincere. Most of the people in that Washington, D.C. forum room in spring 2025 are genuinely patriotic. They genuinely believe they are building tools that will deter conflict rather than initiate it. They genuinely believe that a world where America maintains technological military superiority is safer than the alternative. The Ernestine Fu Mack of Milvet Angels said explicitly that nobody in defense tech is looking to wage war. They're looking to deter it. That may be entirely true at the individual level. But systems do not behave according to the intentions of their creators. They behave according to the incentives embedded in their design and the political environment in which they are deployed. And when the political environment is one of active shooting war, as it is right now in Iran, the tools built with the best deterrence intentions get used at 42 target recommendations per hour, and a primary school gets hit, and 110 children die. The engineers who trained the model didn't want that. The executives who won the defense contract didn't want that. The investor who funded the Series B didn't want that. But nobody put in place the governance architecture to prevent it, either. Because governance is slow. Governance is bureaucratic. Governance asks uncomfortable questions about what happens when the system makes an error in a live war zone. And vibe patriotism doesn't have a lot of patience for uncomfortable questions about error rates and accountability frameworks when the emotional narrative is America must win. The internal fracture within the tech industry on this issue is real, and it is not resolved. Google workers have formally organized opposition to their company's AI defense projects and lost. Anthropic employees described being shocked when their company was blacklisted by the Trump administration after Claude was embedded in military operations. The tension between people who believe their technical skills carry moral weight and should never be pointed at lethal applications, and executives who believe national security imperatives override those individual moral preferences, is being litigated inside every major tech company that touches defense work. What's particularly striking about the vibe patriotism phenomenon is how it has changed the emotional register of a sector that used to pride itself on rational, evidence-based thinking. Silicon Valley has always had mythology, the garage startup, the disruption narrative, the genius founder archetype. But it also had, at least in its self-image, a commitment to data, experimentation, and iterative improvement based on measurable outcomes. The defense tech version of Silicon Valley has swapped out much of that empirical culture for something more nationalistic, more emotionally coded, more flag-adjacent. The pitch deck now comes with a strategic threat assessment of China and a quote from a former special operations commander about what it means to love your country. When Washington Post journalists in late 2025 asked the question, "Is society ready for weapons that think for themselves?" The most honest answer coming from the defense tech industry, wrapped in its patriotic branding and its Hill and Valley Forum energy, was essentially, "We're not waiting to find out. The weapons are being built. They're being deployed." The society conversation can happen after the contracts are signed and the systems are in the field. And that is precisely the danger. The most catastrophic military errors in history have almost never come from lack of patriotism or lack of technological capability. They've come from the gap between the speed of action and the quality of judgment, from the tendency of urgency and nationalism to compress the space where careful thinking lives. Professor Elke Schwartz named this specifically in the context of AI military systems. Automation bias produces action bias. When the machine recommends fast and the human approves fast, the deliberation that is legally and ethically required for the use of lethal force gets squeezed out of the process. What replaces it? The ambient confidence of people who are sure they are on the right side of history, building tools for a righteous cause, and moving fast because the alternative, in their vibe patriotic framework, is losing to China. The rules of engagement that humanity developed over centuries, the Geneva Conventions, the laws of armed conflict, the international humanitarian law frameworks, were built precisely to constrain the tendency of armed forces to act on emotional urgency rather than legal obligation. They were imperfect instruments, routinely violated, inconsistently enforced. But they represented a recognition that the feeling of being at war, the patriotism, the hatred of the enemy, the pressure to win, systematically degrades moral reasoning, and that degradation needs external. The defense tech industry's vibe patriotism has no Geneva Convention equivalent. It has terms of service. It has investor updates. It has keynotes at defense forums where founders talk about serving America. What it does not have, what it has actively resisted developing, is a binding, enforceable accountability framework that applies when the AI kills the wrong people, or when the autonomous system makes a decision that no individual human being consciously authorized. The weapons are being built fast. The flag is flying above the factory. And the questions about what happens when the machine gets it wrong are, for now, being deferred to a later version. A patch that will ship after the conflict, a policy paper that will be written after the casualties, an accountability framework that will be established after the precedent is set in blood. History has a very specific name for that approach. It's called a war crime waiting for a legal theory.